I only joined as co-chair about 2 weeks ago. And the first thing I did was write the intro that you're going to read in the report. And this is my second gig. So you have to forgive me if I have to make little jokes. Where's my fangirl? Where's she gone? Where's Kate? There she is, to laugh at my jokes. She's there. I really, and I'm looking for Harriet now, resonated with the Jacinda Ardern piece. Mainly because I lived in New Zealand for 10 years, so I was there pretty much for her tenure as Prime Minister. I don't even have the word for it, the misogyny, the abuse that she received on a regular basis was overwhelming. And it's quite emotional to talk about it as a woman because it was in the national headlines. Naturally, I've seen the global headlines from her resignation, but I obviously still read the regional, so New Zealand Herald, for example. There's one called Stuff, the spin-off, and I encourage you to look at the spin-off for some of their analysis of Jacinda Ardern's resignation. And that really hit me in the heart because it was hard to read, it was disappointing, but it was also amazing that she made that decision. So I just wanted to get started with what we do here at the Women's Network at EY. So we're the largest network, 3,500 members. I think we're one of the oldest as well. Rebecca, I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah, Emma, yeah. Nodding. And we're slowly increasing locations across the UK. So it was really interesting to see in the report that London actually isn't the top location in terms of the regions in the UK. I think this year it's Birmingham, which is really encouraging to see. I think we all get used to being in London and seeing things in London, so it's nice to see that spread. We have 15 members of our leadership team as part of the network. Meg sends her apologies. She's our sponsor partner. She was desperate to be here today, but she couldn't due to a client clash, so she's really gutted, and hence the reason I'm standing in for her and doing this a bit blind. Yadvir is my co-chair. She also couldn't be here today, but she's out spending the day with her son for his birthday, which is beautiful. So I'm going to just very quickly dash through this, but we do lots of different events here, external and internal, so that we can reach as many women as possible. Last year we had Katie Piper speak about resilience and that progress isn't always linear, and I really liked that. And I think I echo what Vanessa just said. Although those headlines can be quite savage and disappointing, actually it's great to see that people are talking about it and writing about it, and that we're having this conversation in this room. Again, you can see there, for us it's about agitating across our business, and globally it's pretty hard for us to reach as a global organisation. We've got about 350,000 colleagues, and so in our network 3,500 feels like a very small amount, but we do have networks across the globe. The Americas team is pretty big, I think. Oceania and APAC have also got networks that are really attempting to understand what women need in those regions as part of the wider strategy. Vanessa pointed this out. We had 80 last year, 50 this year. I think we can all figure out that there's many different reasons. Survey fatigue, I think being virtual for the past couple of years means that we're just sent surveys constantly. How are you feeling? What are you doing? And that may have had an impression here. But there's some really interesting stuff that's come out of this. And we're seeing that the hybrid events are up, but it's interesting to see how many the attendance of those events. So we've already spoken about this here. We've gone from averaging about 100 to 40. It's still wonderful to see everybody in the room, to be honest, on a really bloody cold day, to be quite frank. It was a bit frosty out there. Now, we know that the networks are maintained. We know that we've seen an increase in networks across, with collaboration and intersection across many different organisations, so family networks, LGBTQ networks, they're all increasing their intersectionality across the women's network, which is awesome. There was a couple of questions in there one of the questions I think was around, would you consider changing the name of your network to be more gender inclusive? So I wonder if that's one of the things you might want to discuss today in the table session. Now, the number of events held, 5 to 10 virtual events. Again, I think it's worthwhile having a discussion about what was the feedback, how do you capture that feedback? Are your topics resonating? One of the things that we've noticed, and Vanessa and I and Leona spoke about yesterday, is it feels like there's a slight shift in the topics, and networking is really, really important. I think that's that allyship and having that conversation with one another to know that you're not alone. And one of the things that we were discussing is it feels like there's a shift from career conversations to general conversations about being a parent and working, how to have those conversations and confidence to ask someone to mentor you, what's the right approach. Apathy, are we seeing so many headlines that actually people are getting a bit bored? And that's a conversation that we wanted to pick up as well, and what's something we've been talking about in our network, because male allyship was down, conversation is a barrier to understanding the conversations men want to have and thinking that the network's just for women. So we need to overcome that as well and have a conversation about what that might look like and how we attract more men. So some of the challenges as a result of COVID, I think it's really interesting to note that this is going on for a couple of years now. Less opportunities to network, face-to-face events have decreased, budgets have not increased compared to speaker fees. That's a really big challenge. I think many of the networks, I see a few of you nodding, I think that's a really big challenge when you want to create meaningful events and you know there's wonderful speakers and you absolutely want to pay these women for the service and the value they are providing. But when your budgets aren't increasing, how do you accommodate that? Could well be to Vanessa's point that less is more and there's only 4 events a year and you really put your budget into those. Keeping the committee engaged. This is a really hard one because the volume of work that we do, and Rebecca, amazing, just a round of applause for you for being such a legend to pull this all together with Leona. The volume of work that the team have to do on top of their day-to-day job is phenomenal, and I know you're all doing the same. And I think that's a real challenge because we want to add value and we want to have these really deep and meaningful conversations, but sometimes you're just bone tired, aren't you? And you get home at the end of the day and you know you've got to write something, or like last night I was in bed reading the report, drinking a gin, and in bed. That's just shocking, isn't it? But it got me through. But the point was, we do get to that point where you're tired. I've got 2 little ones, 2 under 3. And people said, are you taking on too much? I said, no, I have to do this. You have to do it. You want to do it. But how much are we pushing ourselves? And go back to Jacinda Ardern, burnout, and the question around the amount of the fuel in our tanks, which leads me into pressure on timing and that consciousness over time. This was really interesting to see some of these anecdotal pieces coming out and some ideas about innovation. Life experiences and shared advice with others, I think that's a vital part of what we're doing is this networking. One of the topics, we did an internal survey, and it was really interesting to see that more women want to talk about co-parenting, single parenting. I think these taboo topics are absolutely vital to having open, engaging, comfortable, safe conversations in our network. More content around well-being. I think we need to decide what that looks like, because I know at EY we've got a lot of support, and that's a lot of emails and a lot of content around well-being and mental health. What does that look like? For me, it's a really great opportunity to talk to other networks, and this week we had the Time to Talk sessions. No, it was last week, wasn't it, Time to Talk? And I have ADHD, so I'm part of the neurodiversity network as well. And it's really great to see what they're doing. And I've got a call with the lead of that team next week, because I think bringing those other teams in to understand what's happening and how they're talking about well-being in their network is valuable to us also. Skills in a virtual world. big conversation when you've got ChatGPT. Yes, Harriet, nodding. Scary? Yeah, it's Medium released a statement this morning or late last night on how they are going to tackle it. So this is a really interesting one about skills in a virtual world, data, the metaverse, how are we having these conversations? What does it mean for our careers? Very interesting stuff. I know nothing about it. I work in FS. I love that there's some virtual informal coffee breaks. You know, I think that's nice. I think that's a great part of what we're doing as a mentoring. I also like that there's some stuff here that's more fun. So, virtual cinema club, I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds fun. So I really like the idea that it feels from this particular report versus last ones that we actually want to talk about things that aren't just about our career. We want to talk about those other things that impact us, wider society, and that how that impacts our day-to-day jobs and what we're doing. For example, do I wear makeup on a call or not, or do I just go off camera? Big debate for women, because I know now, and I don't know, show of hands, how many of you have completely changed the way you dress? Yeah, I just, some days I don't even get out of bed. I just sort of sit there in my gym jams and, you know, I don't drink gin, I just have coffee. But I think there's that lovely element of change, isn't there, which has made us all feel more comfortable, but it has had a knock-on effect on the things we're talking about in the office, going in and having a chat with your colleagues about shoes, or what you saw on the news last night, how you can support those in Turkey and Syria. We had an email yesterday, didn't we, team, that we can donate, we can drop off clothes, we can do lots of different things, and those water cooler moments I think are vital. So I love that there's some of this featured in the feedback. We touched upon this, and I wonder, by show of hands, do you feel that your male allyship is up or down? Just gut feeling. Up. Okay, that's good. Down. Okay. Not sure. Neutral. It's and I go back to apathy, and I wonder whether we have to be thinking about that as is it a weapon? Are all these headlines? And there's some men I talk to. I won't talk to them anymore, but who are like, oh, yawn, another conversation about, oh, it's all men, it's all, blame us. And you hear that quite a lot. And when I was in New Zealand, that was a very big topic with Jacinda Ardern. She's always attacking men and everything's our fault. Interesting debate, and I feel like what we've seen from some of our internal data, I can't say too much about it because it's confidential, but there's that overwhelming sense that should they be in this women's network, what will they get out of it and how will they help? So I think there's an opportunity there for us to be having those discussions. We can see that the top numbers, actors, allies and attend meetings, has gone down, which is a real shame. Helping run the network, fantastic. Bringing members, fantastic. But these are still small percentages overall. Male sponsors and champions in the business. Who has a male sponsor? Great, okay, where are you from? NatWest, well, of course, naturally. You do as well, where are you from? Okay, great, so again, one, super. Conversation we're absolutely having, and I keep pointing over this way to my EY colleagues, around the male sponsor, because I do think that visibility with senior leadership is crucial to growth, to conversations, to engagement. Your role as co-chair, I have very little experience of this because I'm brand new, but it's really good to see that we've got some really positive numbers here. Average time on the network was 2 to 3 hours a week. Would everybody agree with that? Yeah? Who's doing more? Yeah, absolutely. So another one to have a discussion about, how do we grow our community with fantastic people who can support us with this day-to-day role. Nice one here, more women promoted to management and executive committee roles, 71%. But to Harriet's point, what does that look like? What does that role? Is it executive director? If it's a NED, well, does that really count? More men taking parental leave, so encouraged by this actually and having that conversation. got a colleague in my team, Eric, and he's taking stints of parental leave so he can do, a month here, a month there, and I find that fantastic. Really, really great to see that. More teams with gender balance numbers again, and gender balance across executive teams. Really interesting to have that conversation as part of the gender parity. But I think overall, what I'm reading from this, and you'll see it in the report, is that there is a lot of pressure on us. There's a wider conversation, and someone actually said this off the cuff to me the other day. Are you doing the job of your DE&I team for free? Big conversation. That's a big barbed, comment. And one that I had to digest and think about my own reasons for doing it. And I'm sure it's one for you to all think about as well. But that was I hadn't even thought about it that way. 94% of network leaders collaborating with other parts of the wider business, which is fantastic. It only serves to drive that engagement. So there's lots and lots to think about. Vanessa's going to take over. We're going to have these table discussions. I'm really excited actually to see what these are going to turn out, and I'll join a table as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before we start that, just a couple of observations in there. Just around kind of the networks, the male allyship, I was quite disappointed in looking at that stat because I thought we'd done quite a lot of work over the last few years around engaging men. I don't think the silver bullet is necessarily renaming your network. We've seen that from the data. It isn't attracting the guys. I think it's very much to do with your content. And because I think a lot of content has been driven in terms of I'm not going to say softer subjects, but in terms of things like mental health, well-being, menopause and stuff like that, which predominantly tend to be, and I hate to put the linear line in, but more female-related topics. So maybe that's where there isn't much engagement coming for the men. And maybe where the focus needs to be around that is what we're seeing springing up quite a lot is the Male Allies Network. So these Male Allies Networks, and they're talking about things that are relevant and prevalent to men. So perhaps they're going there. So you really need to think about your content. And just one other thing about content, and we were speaking about this yesterday on our call, we need to really think about the youngsters and how we're building that pipeline of future network members and how are we serving them in terms of content. Because if you've got your girl in your 20s or her 30s, she's not even thinking about menopause yet. She's not even thinking about childcare or anything like that. So some of the topics that we're covering, or we have been covering for the last kind of years, are very much geared towards a certain generation. So one of the things I want you to think about, and maybe something for you to talk about on your tables, is there a place for perhaps a subchapter that plays to the needs of that younger generation, because they're still peachy keen about their careers, mentoring, sponsorship, all of that personal brand, that's really important to them. So please let's not forget that generation, because they're the ones we need to be hand-holding and getting them to where we are. So there's almost like a separate chat, as I say, a separate chapter, separate events that are for that younger generation, and then these other things that are affecting us as perhaps, further on down the line. So please take that away and think about it. Now, before I put you into your table discussions, one of my fellow board members of Gender Networks is actually here. Her and I have discussed the report, and she gives a very wonderful academic view of the report, but she had some really good, interesting observations. So I'm just going to bring her in. So Birgit New, former global head of D&I at HSBC, now does everything for everyone. I'll let you explain what you do. But what did you think of the report?
Thank you. And before I was a global head of D&I, I actually was one of the founders of HSBC's Balance Network. So grew up in networks before going into D&I. But one of the things, sort of building on what everybody else said, that really struck me when I looked at these results, sorry, I'm in the wrong place, was that there's also a bit of a disconnect now when I look at what some of the top objectives of the networks were, and then what the networks are actually doing, and then how you're talking about how you're evidencing success in the networks. So there was a lot around, we want to increase the representation of women. Well, you need to be mindful of, you're not actually hiring people. So is that actually what the network is doing or not? Are you doing something slightly different? Now, if you're trying to deliver on that, increasing the representation of women or at the top of the house particularly, Are we doing enough around career progression? I think to Vanessa's point too, or have we kind of gone, well, we've done that already, we're now moving on to these well-being topics. Well, is that actually in line with what you say you're there to actually deliver? There was also a bit of a worrying drop in the number of networks that are being mentioned in things like annual reports. I would fully expect that your networks are a key portion of what the DEI program is in your organization. So for you not to get called out in an annual report as something really key to delivering some of those stats or ESG report, whatever it is, well, that might also be down to the fact that those reports are getting a lot more scrutiny in terms of the evidence of what are those networks doing, delivering. When you're talking about membership numbers, can you back those up? Because those reports are getting audited. One of the key things that said when, what's the evidence that you have that your network is successful, the top thing that most people talked about was anecdotal evidence. That's not going to fly in an annual report or an ESG report. So I would urge you to go back and look at that straight line again from what are your objectives, what do you say you're doing, what are you actually delivering, and are your measures of success actually all tied back to the same thing? And kind of coming back to some of the things that Harriet was pulling out from the news around women leaving and women dropping, I think we do need to go back to really focusing on career progression, because do people really understand how they're getting ahead now in this hybrid environment? I've had so many conversations with people now, and not just women and men, going, how am I going to get promoted if I don't have the face time in the office? How are these things working now? They're not working the same way that they used to be. Sponsorship doesn't happen the same way that it used to do either. So all of those career-related conversations need to come back into the fray. And I think, that will also help, I think, thinking about everybody's worried about their careers in this environment. Everybody's worried about if I am hopping jobs once a year now, I need to think more about how I'm going to do that. What's that going to look like on my CV? How am I telling my story? What does that mean for my personal brand? So to me, this was actually quite a big warning sign. I mean, it's been interesting to see that the report, a lot has stayed consistent. There were also some things in the reports talking about the new networks that are coming up in your organizations. There were a lot more organizations that were talking about the fact that you've now got mental health networks, you've now got parenting and caring networks. So I'd also urge caution in terms of overstepping if you're suddenly covering those well-being topics and they're covering that too. Again, do we as gender networks need to get back in our swim lane and think about, what are we doing, and again, what are we actually delivering for our organizations, and is that consistent with where our objectives actually are? My job was always in this to throw bombs into these conversations. So, but yeah, just a few things to think about, but very encouraged to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So lots of different things for you to think about. So I'm going to give you just 10 minutes before we move on to Joy and Refuge, just to talk about, there's so much food for thought there in a multitude of different ways and things that you could think about. So put on your tables 10 minutes and then I'll call you back. Hopefully some of you can feedback quickly before we carry on. Is that good? Okay, for those of you on the Zoom, we're going to put you into Zoom rooms. So I think you need to be talking about things like male allyship, talk about, what does that look like in terms of the topics we're covering? Are we overstepping the mark with a multitude of networks? Off you go, discuss. Okay, have I got everyone back? I'm not sure if this mic's working, actually. Can everyone hear me okay? You can hear me, good. Okay, so if I can have everyone back in on the Zoom as well. So did anyone on the tables have any discussion that they could share with the group? This is where you'll talk back to me. What have you guys been talking about? Because I'll pick on someone. Okay. So we're not going to be able to see you on the Zoom. So do you want to come up front?
Oh, God, okay. I was just going to give you a update.
So what were you supposed to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Louise Walker from BNP Paribas.
So what was you talking about on your table?
We were talking about allyship predominantly and trying not to your point about thinking about the content of what you're offering and trying not to isolate men, but rather bring them in. And I was just reflecting on our agenda for Women's Day, and it's very female focused. So obviously I think for one day of the year that's perfectly fine, but on a more kind of day-to-day basis, how are you really bringing people as part of the journey? And I'm so sorry, your name? Deborah was saying that they at UBS they have a male allyship program. Supported by the network, which I would love to do in BNP Paribas. We have plenty of senior men, so it should be something that we should be doing to get them engaged in the conversation. We were talking about paternity leave and those sort of challenges, and how COVID has helped, but we're starting to see things going back a little bit to how we were before, and the assumption and the expectation, especially in financial services, in front office roles, that they have to be there. And they're all men, so we've got some structural issues to fix. So we need to get in early and try and influence the conversation.
Fantastic. So I think that, talking about that conversation, you're right. If you probably look at your agendas, they are leaning more towards women. So how do we expect for the men to be engaging? And I think there's almost a moment where in every kind of in every network that you have, where you do have this stop point, where you go, okay, let's have a look at actually what we're, to Birgit's point, what we're trying to achieve, how we're measuring that, and how inclusive are we being to everybody else? And will some of those kind of topics that we've got on our agenda, will men look at that and think, yeah, that's for me? I'd be interested actually, and I hate to single out gentlemen that join us in the room, but I do have a gentleman here. I mean, what's your perspective on it? Can I ask your opinion? Yeah. Come and join me.
Thank you. So Matt Terry from Marsh. What's my perspective on it? I mean, it's something we grapple with a lot. I think we were talking earlier about the fact that when I was appointed co-chair, I think we grappled with that, or the people making that decision grappled with that. I mean, I was always enthused by it because it felt like such an important topic that we needed to get right as a business, as a societal issue, and all of the things that come with that. So I think we do grapple with it. I think we have good engagement from men. I think the piece that I'm finding really interesting from the research is the fact that virtual events seem to be having a negative impact on male engagement. And why is that? Is that because men see value in the networking and the sort of coming together as individuals more than female colleagues, or is that because the topics aren't as interesting to them, or why is that? So I think we need to give that some thought and kind of explore that. We're going back to in-person events whenever we can. We had one recently which was reasonably well attended, but nowhere near the levels that we used to get. So we're going to fight on with that. And then the point around paternity leave, we were discussing a lot, weren't we? Where shared parental leave is great, but the uptake is pretty poor. Yeah. We shifted our policy very significantly around having full paternity leave up to 16 weeks, full pay. And now we've got streams of men taking it, which is wonderful to see. And the best bit about it is the conversations I've overheard or been part of where men have come and said, well, how on earth is the business going to help with this? How are we going to manage this? And it's like, well, this is the point, right? You've managed okay with women for a long time and all of the impact that that's had. So this is the problem. This is the challenge we wanted to set. So it's wonderful to see that flowing through. But one point I guess I would just leave on is a point I slightly disagreed with, actually, which is I think younger female colleagues are actually asking us a lot around planning for family and impact on their careers and stuff. So I think we sort of need to think about what topics are relevant to them, but actually we are planning an event with our young professionals group around actually what does taking parental leave look like for male and female colleagues, and planning ahead for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And again, I think there's some interesting points. Do the men not attend the virtual events because they don't see the value in taking an hour out of a working day? Food for thought on that one. And I see your point about planning for a family. We often get, obviously, our community at Wheeler City is huge, but when we've had focus groups and stuff, we always get asked by the young girls, when's the right time to have a child? How do you work out it's the right time? I'm like, no spreadsheet is ever going to tell you that, but it just works out somehow. So yeah, I mean, to your point, there'd be different things for different people, and I think that's what we need to get to. It's a bit like kind of the theme around International Women's Day as we move from equality to equity. It's about having a more tailored approach to the needs rather than thinking this one blanket agenda is going to fit all. And that makes your jobs really harder. So I think I've got a couple more minutes. Was there any discussion on this table? I'm looking at you. Always. What did you discuss?
My name's Alison. I'm from EY and was previously in Women Fast Forward, and now I'm in Global Markets. And we had a great discussion here on the table about the next generation and Gen Z. What can we do for them? And I think sometimes we get lost in our networks, and we have networking lunches, and we get together and we talk. But the big piece here is what's the action and what's the deliverable, and how are we going to make that change? And as my role as a change manager, it's looking at what the next generation aspire to, what they need, what support they need, and then put those procedures in place. And my other colleague here are you from NatWest? Do you want to talk about your proposal? Which is quite good. But it's just thinking about... Go ahead.
Now I'm thinking, which one? What did I talk about? Mentor her? That one?
Mentor her.
Yeah, so we were just saying, I say we, I take no credit. It's another phenomenal woman in the team, but she's introduced to NatWest a program called Mentor Her, and I believe it's run by Lean In, and it's where you basically match up a more senior man with a more, I hate these phrases, senior, junior, but a more junior woman. So they can be any level in the organisation. It's just the idea that the man will be more senior than the women. And then they have a reverse mentoring kind of partnership, which is working, I guess, to address two key things. The first is that kind of culture piece, for the women being able to say, actually, you know, this is what it's like for me, these are the challenges I'm facing, and how that man being more senior is therefore able to help that and giving some clear actions, I guess. And then there's also that career development piece that you talked about. So we did a survey with our members last year, and they said the thing that's most important to them in terms of what we can offer as a network is support with career development and progression. So actually, again, just by matching them with someone more senior in a mentoring relationship that can just help them navigate some of that and the things that women typically need more help with, has really worked. So it's growing and growing, but yeah, would really recommend looking into that.
And just to finish, we learn from each other.
Absolutely.
So the mentor and the mentee, we all come away with something.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. And that Lean In stuff, by the way, we've had Lean In come and speak to Gender Networks. It's on the portal. A lot of their stuff is free. They're just like templates and examples of programs that you guys can just lift as well. And just one of the other things that I would say is around data. One of the ladies who just left, she was saying to me, all this boils down to how we capture our data. You know, in terms of who's turning up, who are we losing, you know, what are the topics that worked well, what didn't. It is constant, it's a constant evaluation of what we're doing. I don't think we're in a position anymore where we can just set the agenda at the start of the year and say we're covering these 4 topics, because we all know societal things come in and kind of screw that out the window. So I think it's a constant, when you have your committee meetings, is sitting down going, okay, is Q2, Q3, Q4 fit for purpose given the current state that we're in, or have the plates moved again? So again, just different things for you to think about.